Hello, everyone. This is Jeff from Irenicast. This week is going to be our final installment on our 4-part series on truth. This episode was recorded before the murder of George Floyd. This conversation centers around changing truths. And each of us on the show, we share our deconstruction process or our shift or our truth changes. Through the course of this conversation, as we each share our own individual stories, we begin to realize fairly quickly how our race, gender, sexual identity played a part in the impact that our truth change had on our lives. And because that becomes a large portion of the conversation that you're about to hear, we felt it would be disingenuous to not mention up front the murder of George Floyd and how relevant these themes are to us today and how much they are on the forefront of everyone's mind. But we also don't want to just leave it at that. And although we strive all the time here on Irenicast to make sure that we are valuing and lifting up people's voices from all walks of life, particularly those from marginalized communities and people groups. We want to make sure that we use our platform appropriately. And we feel that the most appropriate way that we can do that at this point is to highlight the voice of others. So in the beginning of the show notes for this episode, irenicast.com/168, and on our website, we are going to be cultivating an evolving list of anti-racist resources. And you can see the full list as it continues to evolve on irenicast.com/anti-racist. And if you go to our page, it'll be one of the prominent tabs at the top as well going forward. The situation that we find ourselves in right now is not new. It may be more prominent, it may be more visible, but it is not new. And there are wonderful and amazing and intelligent voices that have been speaking to us for decades about the issues that we see in front of us right now. So we want to share those voices. We want to share those resources that help all of us here on Irenicast strive to be anti-racist in everything that we do. So we encourage you to check out that list. We encourage you to educate yourselves. We encourage you to learn more about why we are where we are and what we can do about it. So again, that resource list will be found at irenicast.com/anti-racist, and it will be an evolving document, and we will continue to add to it as we continue to learn more ourselves. We hope that you find this week's episode encouraging and thoughtful and helpful in your journey wherever you may be. So without any further ado, here is our final episode in our truth series, Changing Truths. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are Irenicast. I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
It's Casey.
This is Rajiv.
On the first and third Tuesday of every month,
we bring to you our perspectives
on theology and culture
from a post-evangelical lens.
Thank you for joining us for another conversation to provoke your progressive Christian imagination. This week, God willing, we are going to be finishing our truth series with a part 4. We've talked about truth as a concept. We've talked about moral truth. We've talked about where our sources of truth come from. And today we're going to be talking about changing truths, how our truths have changed. What are some ways in which we can equip ourselves, I guess, to change and move and flow within the truths that life presents to us, I guess, would be the way to put it. And we're going to try to the best of our collective ability to keep this maybe practical.
With our powers combined.
That's right. Try not to head off into too many heady realms, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. This is the nature of a conversation. We just do what we do. And for our segment, we're bringing back an oldie but a goodie, one that we like to call Famous Christians for 100. I'm excited about this. I think this is the first time we've played this game all together as this iteration of the Irenicast. And the last time we played it, Casey, it was you and I on your episode, on episode 131. And we had a good time with that. So let's get into this. Bonnie has curated a group of questions for us to kind of guide this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to our resident guru, our sage, our
truth changer.
Our truth changer. And she's gonna ask us some questions. It's about to get real. It's about to get deep. It's about to get
something.
There you go.
Let's start with that. As we were talking about truth, the last 3 episodes, it kept striking me that, each of us, as individuals has gone through a process of changing truth. And we talked about, do we discover truth? Do we make up truth as we go? All of those kinds of things. But the truth is, each of us has gone through this process of discovering or of living into a whole new truth. So let's talk about that. What was it like for you to wake up one morning and just know that you were no longer operating with the same set of beliefs that had formed you? How did you know? And what was that like for you?
It was odd for me. I think it depends on how big the truth is, right? And some of the truths that I had were all-encompassing, world-shaping, universe-shaping, and had lots of consequences. And so waking up outside of that was unsettling in some ways, I guess.
Well, I mean, before the waking up to a new reality, there's this process that kind of, you begin to, at least in my experience, I began to feel like maybe I had been lied to and betrayed by the people I had once trusted, and there was this new information, maybe even some evidence coming to light that, oh, this isn't what they said it was, and navigating through that. And you want to defend, or at least I wanted to defend where I had come from as being legitimate for as long as I possibly could. And once the sense of betrayal and this just isn't right, when it fell apart, the falling apart happened rapidly. The holding on took a long time, and that's where some subtle shifts happened. But once it fell apart rapidly. So there was the anger, bewilderment, and now what?
I think it felt terrifying because, I'm a communal person. I love being in relationship with people. And I knew that waking up that morning and my truth and my world shifting would mean that a lot of the people I loved and cared for and cared about me would most likely turn their back on me or walk away. And the heavy weight of either telling my truth or not. Because in telling my truth, it would send me on a path, at least I thought, would leave me isolated and alone. And so that was scary, to know that these people who said they loved you, who said that they would walk with you right through the fires of hell, really did not have the capacity to do that, because the person I was becoming and the truth that I now knew would require that they would have to walk away. And I would have to also.
That reminds me, Casey, I forget sometimes, but it's almost like you're setting off with just the consequences as your only journeying partners. Because people in your family, people in your church, people in your school, whatever, are not with you on that journey and are explicitly not so. So it's like, not only are you kind of shifting what you believe, the consequences are looming larger and larger. For some of us, that's like loss of income too, not just community, but also livelihood.
That's right.
That's sobering.
Yeah, for sure.
Jeff, what about you?
This is a tough question for me, because I don't think that I can pinpoint a moment. I kind of feel like it's the opposite of Rajiv's experience, where it wasn't just this collapse, it was this slow burn. And there never was one catastrophic incident that I would say changed everything. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure how to articulate. I think it was there from the very beginning, is that I was always taught to question. I don't even know if question's the right word. I was taught to be suspect, overtly, or just that's where my circumstances growing up brought me to. and I've, shared this before, but sharing my internal monologue led to negative consequences. So I learned quickly to keep that to myself and present a certain person. I think for me, the tipping point was when the person that I was presenting became disingenuous. Then that's when I couldn't hold it together any longer. So it wasn't like it wasn't this thing where it's like be all things to all people where I'm just going to pretend to be this with someone else. They were all still reflections of who I was. It wasn't a matter of pretending to be something I'm not. It was a matter of choosing which part of my personality to represent in this given moment with this given group. So once I was in a group where there were less and less of my personality traits that I could fully express, then it was, I can't do this anymore. I don't have anything left. And I think that a lot of those things were interactions that I had with authority. I had pretty regular confrontations with the pastors that I was working for. And they always came down to the difference between what we were saying and what we were actually doing. And I think my idealism got in the way. A lot of that is that when my idealism clashed with reality and what we were actually doing, those were probably the big moments where it's like, no, but wait, we said this. And then realizing over time, oh, we said that, but we really mean this. We're really doing this. And those moments were catalysts for me in terms of where that changing truth was going to come to. Because to me, the only real truth is my experience. I'm sure, Alan, you have what the term is for that. But I like, to me, that's just it. Like if I'm thinking something and I'm doing something and I hit something in my real life that doesn't match up with that, then I have to reevaluate those thoughts, because otherwise to me, they're just an exercise in, whatever. And I'm fine with that. Like I like doing that. I think that's fun, but I think that to hold on to anything that doesn't match up with my experience is, right or wrong, it's crippling, because your experience is you.
Did you feel like it was choice? This shift?
No, the shift wasn't a choice at all. The shift happened. What to do about it was a series of choices.
Whereas everyone else in your life is telling you it is a choice.
Well, they don't know what they're talking about. They literally don't know what they're talking about.
Because some of us who are on the other side of things and don't want people to change, we're consciously making a choice to shove down some of our curiosities and doubts and cognitive dissonances. And, when I said that, like, my changing truth, it depends on how big the truth is. While listening to you, Jeff and Casey and Rajiv talk, I realized my biggest shift in truth happened when I realized I might not be married anymore. I remember waking up one morning and looking at my closet and seeing my clothes and her clothes and being like, there could come a day where it's just my clothes in the closet. And like, what does that mean about me? Am I going to be able to survive? Will I be able to emotionally cope? Like, what are all the practical things that will happen? And I felt in my body kind of a response. I never really had that with my changing faith, just because I still feel held by the universe. Little baby Alan held by the entire universe. Like whatever. I was always very fond of physicists, especially like Richard Feynman and others who said things like, whatever was true when I was born is still true. And I'm just getting to know it, and it's going to be true when I die. And so I felt like, that Rajiv mentioned this need to defend. And I've been in those places, even on this show. If you go to depends on which episode you're on. I'm defending what I think, because that's the way that I was raised with brothers. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, I've never felt like the truth ever needed to be defended. If something is worth believing, something is worth holding on to, it's self-evident. But when it came down to like my truth about my life and who I am, I understood myself as being a married person because I got married at 19. And so when I realized there was a future where that wasn't true anymore, like kind of even warming up to that idea was hard, and it was an embodied experience.
Yeah, as I was listening to all of you, my experience of transition didn't feel like it involved choice at all, but it was very much, I was very much the center of my own agency, but it wasn't about choice. And I think that, it's hard to, I'm not sure what language to quite put to that, but I do remember being lured. That's the word that you've heard on this podcast before in relationship to process theology. But I do remember feeling like there is this yearning or drawing out that's happening within me and is causing me to go into these different avenues of thought that I told were wrong or would lead me down a path that would end in destruction and hell and, all the worst things you can imagine. And yet I felt like I had to go. I had to go. To be a human being, to be alive, I had to go. Yeah, it was like drinking water. It felt like that sense of urgency within me. That's partly why I asked you, was it a choice for you? Or how would you describe that,
When you asked that, the first thing that came to mind was, and that this is going biblical on you, but was the prophet Jeremiah, where he's like, I want to stop this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be your mouthpiece. I don't want to do this work because all it leads for me is suffering, but I can't. There's like a fire in my bones. There's something that won't let me stop. And I feel like that's been a constant in me, is that at some point I was set on this path where these are things that have to be a reality. And I thought I found a set of beliefs that moved me towards that reality. And then when I realized they didn't, that internal drive didn't change. It was, now I need a new face for those. And I don't even know if that's right, because it seems superficial, because it's not. Like, it's this intangible thing that I don't know if I ever have the right words for it. But yeah, like the way you're describing that, I know exactly what you mean, but I can't articulate it at all.
Here I am, or what is it? Here I stand, so help me God, I can do no other, right? That's the feeling I had. Because the only other option was death. Like, I either step into this new reality and tell the truth of my life, or I will find myself dead. And I think that is the truth for many of us. I mean, in recovery groups, they say you're only as sick as your secrets. And I think that a part of what many of us struggle with is like, this truth is being drawn out of us always. It's whether we choose to step into it or not. I really wanted to ask you guys this. It's related. Don't worry, everyone. But I wonder about, like, Alan was saying these truths have been there all along. Our capacity to wonder, I think, is something that is actually primal, but there's something in us that we know deep within ourselves that there are these questions we have, these truths we have to live by. And I think there are people who are just choose not to, they just shut it off, right? What is that? In the beginning was the conversation. It can be translated, not the word, but the conversation. And the conversation was God and was with God. And I think that conversation dwells deep within us. It is a conversation that we long to be in relationship with the infinite, with all of creation. And I think that one of the biggest issues is that we're told not to wonder, not to ask. Maybe that's a tangent, but I just know that this truth thing, telling the truth, meant life or death for me. And I think for so many, it's the same options.
And there's more than one form of death.
Right. That's right. Right.
I'm wondering, in hearing each of us talk, there's clearly markers of transition. And some of us, it sounds like, was just leaving one environment because that environment was toxic, but not necessarily leaving the faith, the underlying faith of that environment, and just moving to a new environment where that faith that you had already, it sort of had better nutrition and space to flourish, versus, like, in my experience, the faith was gone. God was dead. The faith unraveled. There was like nothing. So am I misunderstanding how your experiences are different than mine?
No, I think you're, at least for me, you're right on. Like that, there was never a lack of faith. There was never a moment of God is this or God is that. But I think for me, I can pinpoint why that is because for me, it was this slow burn. Like my faith or idea of God or theology, I felt like was changing in bits. And because there was not a moment, I think that really contributed to the fact that I didn't feel like I needed to lose anything because it was almost as if my theology was evolving with my experience. And I think a big part of that has to do with my personality is because I wasn't sharing with people, right? Like I wasn't, I wasn't taking anyone's advice. Like if someone told me something that didn't ring true, I was just like, whatever. So I didn't have any like leaders or mentors in my life that I allowed to disappoint me. So it was just like, I totally, that concept that your experience is foreign to mine for sure.
I think for me, I lost it all. I mean, I remember the first thing that went for me was this idea of Jesus as God, Jesus as Savior. I was one of the first. I mean, I had so many questions for so long, but I actually entertained that notion. And then I found a book in the public library in Placerville, California called, what's it called? Pagan Christ, something like that. It was written like in 1910. And I read it and I realized that the story of Jesus was so much like the stories of so many other mythologies where there was a baby born in a cave. And I began to think, maybe this isn't true in a literal way. And if it's not true, then what does that mean about the truth about Jesus? And it just all felt like bullshit. I mean, after a while, and when your entire world view begins to feel like bullshit, I couldn't even walk. You know, if it just everything about the floor dropped out, and it was so disorienting and so like problematic that it's hard to even, like, it's not a space I like to go back to and think about. And yet I think it was also an incredibly rich time because it's where I found myself and my own voice. But for me, yeah, Rajiva, it's very much like what you described. It was an earthquake.
I live in some sort of dualism around this, Rajiv. I feel like I let go, that none of it mattered. In fact, to this day, if I'm in a really dark place, you'll know because I'll say something like, "What's the point?" I live with that question a lot in my life. What is the point? And yet, I hear baby Alan's voice of, "I was held by the universe," you know? Some of that still resonates in me of like, maybe I like this sense of presence, essence, whatever. Hindsight says I could see that, and I could see it in the mentors that I found, you know. That was a big thing for me. Like when I decided to come out, I still wanted to ride my high horse, right? I still wanted, like, I kept that part of my evangelicalism of like, I need to look and be a certain way. And so I reached out to people who I thought modeled best for me what being a gay man and Christian could look like. And so maybe that's where being held was, right? Maybe it was never God or the universe, but I was certainly held by those men who let me cry and let me wonder and let me throw it all away and let me attempt to pick it back up. But I want to be clear in saying that, you know, I often will say that I am far more religious than I am spiritual. Because for me, I feel like I've had to like rebuild those muscles, those spiritual muscles. That sounds so stupid, but it's like a practice. Like I just keep showing up. I keep, you know, doing the things that I think Jesus invites us to do and hoping that I can find my way back to something that speaks to something bigger. Some days it works, and some days it doesn't. I'm still in that process, and I don't think that should be a big thing. I don't think people should be like, "Oh my God, Casey is like an atheist or whatever," because I'm not. I'm just unsure about what being held looks like. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
this is kind of crystallizing some stuff for me. Like disparate thoughts, something about control with Bonnie and like lack of control or loss of control, or maybe control not being important anymore. And then this thing having to move forward. Casey speaking about wonder and how like that's part of being a human being. I wonder if all of us have had these threads of curiosity and wonder from when we were kids that are still a part of us that we can draw on. You asked Rajiv, like, something about like whether the floor had dropped out or whatnot. And I think I went to talk about my divorce because for me, that's when a floor dropped out. When it comes to faith, I feel like I've had multiple streams of meaning built into me since I was really young to where it didn't feel so traumatic. Like I was going through my old journals in high school and they're all brutal. It's just so hard to read. Like, you know, I'm an awful sinner. I'm the worst. Like stuff that I would never want to hear an adolescent say about themselves. But then I came to this thing in the middle of my junior year of high school and I wrote, I often wonder what the purpose of everything is. Even more so, I wonder where to find it. In the annals of history, in the laws of physics, in human interaction, in the pursuit of individual achievement, of God. I look at the stars and find my place of humility. How can all this be about me or even humankind? Its pursuits do not worry the cosmos or even increase the length of history's timeline. Now I come to my point, how can such considerations be conveniently answered in a book? This question begins to fill me with doubt, but the answer is ever before me. Has God created us to obscure himself from our scope of vision? I tend to think not. And then I kind of go a little deeper, and then I'm realizing now that I think there are kernels of resilience and continuity in us. Casey's talking about wonder, right? Being that thread throughout our whole lives. At some point, maybe it got squashed or, you know, put into a certain box. But for me, there is something true, Bonnie, about it. On some level, it's about control. I have to, like, my present development is about coming to grips with, you know, we're leaving environments that said human responsibility, like individual responsibility and control are everything. You're making decisions every day on whether you believe or not, whether you're going to obey or not. And there's an ignoring all of context, all the systems that are participating in our lives, and then also the gray areas. So I'm coming around to something. I think that question about whether it's something we can control or not is an interesting one for me personally. Sorry if that's way too much. I just read from my journal.
I think that's awesome. We should all have our journals standing nearby just in case.
No, I appreciate that. You know, a big part of it is your honesty and willingness to share. But another part of the appreciation is this is one area where it really contrasts how we're different and yet in relationship. You know, we don't have the same experience when we talk about transition or moving from one set of truths to different sets of truths. Our journeys in this way is pretty different.
Do you think it has something to do with the fact that, like, forgive me if this is just a weird thing to point out, but the straight white guys are the ones who had gradual truth transitions, and the people who like embodied all of these different like oppositional truths are the ones who had the floors drop out?
I think that's really insightful observation, Alan. And I'm not sure, you know, but it is, that would be a really interesting thing to study.
Well, and I appreciate that, Alan, because I think, because I wrestle with that as a straight cisgender male, the structure that I grew up in was very much about perpetuating that. So, you know, a big part of my process, not a big part, but something I was aware of in the process was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to figure out how to be a man in a very different way, because this is all I've known.
I wonder if it's true, Alan, that about this slow burn versus the floor dropping out, because it really doesn't require your entire life.
Right.
Right? Like you can make statements and live. Throughout history, women have been burned at the stake for making faith claims or believing differently. People of color have been murdered for taking up space in the world and telling their own truths. Queer people the same. And so for you to change your opinion, there's enough space in the world for you to change your opinion because you are a cisgendered white guy, straight white guy. And it doesn't, and your literal life is not at stake when you change your mind or you choose to speak up.
And you don't have to leave to be heard. Right.
Yes. I just talked recently to some straight white cisgendered men who are clergy, and they said, I consider myself a moderate. Like, I've been able to go around in the circles where people disagree with me. And I think there's an element of truth to that. Like, I eventually had to make the decision, am I going to work in conservative churches or not, that don't allow gay people, that don't allow women.
You get to make that decision.
But I get to make that decision. You're right. And so it's something I can come to terms with on my own time. Dang.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, the more I think about it, like, what the set of beliefs that had to change for me included the way that I had participated in a system that was oppressive to me and to other women. And so it was like sort of owning up to the reality that I had participated. I had like swallowed that pill, and I had participated in that system. I had upheld these beliefs. And then I felt this like just anger at myself and disgust at myself for being so unjust. And I think on the other side of this, like, I always had sensibilities around caring for the poor and looking out for those in the margins and so on. But it was a much more charity-based approach. And having gone through this transition from this one truth paradigm to now a new truth paradigm, which is always up for question as well, it's less about charity-based and more about withness. And then that's when the justice fires really start to burn, because I realize I am part of this.
That's right. Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's like really interesting to think about how, and Jeff talks a lot about experience being the root of the way we can talk about truth at all. And identity, several of us mentioned identity as part of our experience, and how this change in truth was also a change in identity, like maybe married to unmarried. And what does that mean then for us as people in one truth paradigm versus another truth paradigm? I think it's all like, and I hope our listeners will weigh in on their experience, because like we talked about our own experiences being so diverse. I imagine every single person listening, there's going to be like little moments where it's like, oh yeah. And then other times where people are going to say, that wasn't me at all. It would be really cool to hear from you all out there listening.
Yeah, for sure. And Alan, like one of the streams and some of the ways that you've been talking is you've been using the word embodiment, and then when you ask that question about, the two of us having this more gradual shift where the bottom didn't fall out and stuff like that, is I feel like I've had the privilege my whole life to avoid embodiment. My body has never been an issue. It's never been a subject of ridicule. It's never been a reason for any kind of action towards me. And there's a lot of safety in it that I'm realizing. Like, embodiment is something that I'm like literally just now learning, like this current phase in my life. And it's something that's super difficult for me. Body, you mentioned earlier, like listening to your body, and I don't listen. Like, I don't want to listen. And then realizing after, Alan, you asked that question, like, well, how could, like, that's such a privilege to be able to avoid and not have to think about, because there's never an external voice that's calling me out on that. And I always have to remember that those things are connected in a way, and that I've had a lot of opportunity in that, and that my deconstruction or changing of truth or whatever we want to call it was pretty, even though it was marred by personal tragedy in certain places in my life. But even that tragedy was on the backs of someone else's body. When my wife miscarried, and I was there and I was affected by it, but not in the same way. And I don't know, and probably will never know, what that feels like.
Well, I don't want to push too hard, but I've been realizing lately, like, in this whole conversation around fat phobia and the stuff that's happening right now in our different circles, tapping into the fact that, like, I was always a fat kid. I've been fat my whole life, and I have been judged for that since I was very young, and put on the outside of certain communities, and looked at and told things. And I think all of us, to some degree, can probably find somewhere where we've gone through the cycle of shame or difference or otherness. And I think, our steps to maturity are always immature. It's immature for me to be like, oh, wow, your experience as a woman or a queer person or a person of color, like me connecting with that through my experience as someone who's been in a community that's outside of the norm. I think that you have to go through those, like, immature connections to kind of open up your consciousness to be like recently hearing people talk about, fat shaming and fat phobia when the people are not themselves fat. Like, that was a weird experience for me. I was like, is this what it feels like? Is this what it feels like to have people who are token in conversations, and people who are not a part of the community doing their own work, and feeling like just so disconnected from it? Like, okay, go let them all work it out themselves. Don't come to me as a resource. Like, all those different questions that, like, I kind of hear in different areas. So maybe, not to push you, Jeff, but, like, anyone listening, and also maybe you, connecting to those places where you have been experienced exclusion is something to kind of meditate through and think deeply on.
No, I appreciate the push, because when you're mentioning that, like, that is also outside of my experience. Like, I maybe personally I felt you had body images, but it was never an external thing. And I feel, I don't know, lucky and guilty about that all at the same time. But you're right. Like, none of that has influenced my faith journey. None of it. My body has not entered into it, so I can easily ignore it.
And if I could be clear, like, the fat phobia thing hasn't affected my faith journey that much, because it's not like that's on the outside of church experience.
What brings me back to Jesus, by the way, everyone, is this idea of this requires your whole life. This might require your whole being, including your body. And when I was moving through my truth, I kept coming back to that Jesus understood what it meant to live truthfully. Your truth might require your whole life, your whole body. And that meant something to me. Like, I needed to know that my truth was worth my whole life. And I think that's, so when I started doing organizing, I was a community organizer before I was a pastor. And I often say that I think that organizing prepared me to be the best pastor I could be. And when I was being interviewed, they said, what is your relationship to immigration? What is your relationship to mass incarceration? Because those are the things that I would be working on. And my response is nothing, right? Nothing. I have no relation to that. But I do know the pain of what it means to live on the periphery and have a society leave you for dead. And I'm willing to sit and listen and hold space for any person and learn from them. Sit at their feet and allow them to tell me their story, and and I will believe them. Like, that is my commitment to this work. To always listen and to believe the stories I hear and honor them with my body. And I think that that's the invitation, Jeff, and for others who would say like this isn't my experience. But as you begin to hear truths, how do you hold those truths, and how are you willing to put your body on the line for the sake of for another?
That's very Jesus-y. That's awesome.
Casey, as you were saying that, I think the most profound lesson that I learned as a youth pastor, that I think really laid the groundwork for me to be able to be in that place to just listen, is being a youth pastor, and recognizing that the first lesson that I learned when I was working with adolescents was, it doesn't matter if it's true or real, if you discount their experiences, their relationships, their boyfriends, their girlfriends, all the quote unquote drama that happens in high school, and you discount it and you try to take them beyond that, you're doing them a disservice, because you're denying and not acknowledging the reality that they actually live in. And you're doing that from a place of privilege. And that posture, I think, is what made me so uncomfortable going forward in church, and probably informed a lot of where I ended up. And then now hearing the voice and the stories of people of color, of people on the margins, of women, of trans people, of whoever, and taking that posture first, I'm thankful for that experience, and that I hope that stays with me, because it's people's experience, and you can't unexplain that. You can't push people out of that. And that's why, it's one thing for me to say to someone, it gets better, but it's another thing, Casey, for you to say that to someone. And as who I am, my job is not to take people out. My job is to acknowledge where they're at.
Is your God a gaslighter? That's the question.
We've moved from is your God a dick to is your God a gaslighter?
Yeah,
All right.
Same thing.
No, your experience doesn't matter. You didn't feel that. You didn't experience that. That's not true. I feel like I have worshipped that God in the past at different times.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all have.
So it's a completely different experience than, I imagine, to realize that you're saving your own life, and to realize that you're saving other people's lives, other people whose lives are just as important as yours. And I think we're sort of always living in that tension between those two, and of the ways that we're privileged and the ways that we're not privileged, or the ways that we're the parts of ourselves that we might even hide that are unprivileged.
I think that's why I have been pushing all along throughout the Truth episodes to talk about being in relationship, right? Because it's not just you alone. You're not just moving through the cosmos by your damn self. And when you make that shift to tell the truth, the experience feels isolating. It feels as though you're going to go alone. But even in my own shifting, look what I've come upon, but 4 amazing friends. I mean, we found each other, and I wouldn't trade these friendships for anything in the world, quite frankly. That's something that I would tell anybody who is on this journey, who is sitting at home, who's maybe sitting on their truth, who's, we've heard from people who, there's a teenager who used to sit in their closet and listen to our podcast, right? Like, for any of you who are sitting in closets, whether they be physical or whatever, when you make that shift, there will be people on the other side. And you will learn from them, and you will grow with them. And when you make that shift, people are watching. And maybe they are not ready to grow with you. Maybe they're not ready to walk with you, but you are allowing them to start the path. I mean, when I decided to come out, I was in a small-ass Christian college of 150 students. Every student who had come out before me either came out and was thrown out, or ran out, basically, or came out after they graduated because they knew it was unsafe. And in my mind, it was, if I come out now, I am basically laying the groundwork for people to come behind me. And if I don't do it, who will? How much longer do we have to wait? always being in mind, keeping in mind that that this just isn't about your own truth. When you lay these truths out, you are building new relationships, and you are also paving the path for others who will come behind you or who just need it.
And that, Casey, calling out individualism is very poignant at this moment in time, because this idea of bootstrap success,
totally,
all that kind of stuff. The individualism is being seen for what it is, which is essentially we've created a system of idolatry around predatory people. These,
say that again, louder for those in the back.
But it's an extension of the kind of religion we all have experience with.
Totally.
And this moment in time is shedding a huge light on where the real work, where real grace, where real love, real community exists. And it's not with the people that have the spotlights on them that are predatory masters. It's with us. It's with people who are willing to have open arms and open hearts and find ways to be connected and survive.
And a willingness to be a part of that larger community feels like a loss of control.
Yes.
For a lot of folks.
And when you worship an all-powerful God, what does that do to your relationship to power? And I think that's part of what we're trying to explore here is then you worship power. When you worship an all-powerful God, you worship power. Individual power, often.
I need to think about that. I'm going to write that down.
So,
well, I mean, that's a big part of the power of the Christ, is there's this death.
If you worship the Christ on the cross, you're worshiping vulnerability.
Yes.
Right.
If you're worshiping Christ the victor in this, wielding a sword, you're worshiping that militaristic power. And it's all in the Bible, right?
And it happened pretty quickly, right? Like in the course of Christianity, that transition happened real fast.
Absolutely. So if we didn't do this, none of us might have felt really isolated, but we didn't do it alone. We didn't walk this path of transitioning from one set of truths to another. So who were your guides?
Jeff. Okay, I know that sounds so funny, but Jeff was a part of it. I mean, Jeff was he was my dealer. I remember being in Bible college and being like, I'm not getting the good stuff. And he would whisper and he'd hand me something. He'd be like, hey, Alan, if the flood never actually happened, you can still believe in the Bible, quote unquote. And I was like, are you kidding me? He's like, here's this resource. Here's this resource. And so I bought books by we talked about Tony Campolo, books with Tony Campolo, Adventures in Missing the Point. N.T. Wright was a really important one for me to read the Bible as this staging of stories and even what story means and even what reading means. And so there's folks. And then I don't think I really took off until I started encountering liberation theology in my seminary experience.
I'd say for me, I mean, this is weird. We're doing a little bit of the congratulating one another, but the truth is, Bonnie was hugely instrumental in my awakening. As far as my life, I was like, this is all working. We're imperfect, but we're trying to do better. And then to have these new realizations come along, thanks to Bonnie and her willingness to explore and learn, I could not sidestep it. And so from there, trying to reach out to existing mentors, existing friends, and finding there was no substance anywhere, then it was just then the scales on the eyes, using biblical language, just fall away, and you're like, holy shit, these people are just hollow robots when it comes to their faith walk, so to speak. So, but then to have to, probably the biggest space of that was a void was going from thinking you had something legitimate and true and honest and well-formed to okay, that's not real. And then not having any knowledge, growing up in these conservative, high control environments, you don't have knowledge of what else is out there. So then to make that leap to find and seek and like, oh, okay, there's some great resources, but not, I didn't have a dealer other than Bonnie, and we were both like, had never been users. So, yeah, kind of.
That's always a bad thing, by the way. That can always be dangerous.
There's a lot of listeners who are in that same spot right now. We get messages. Yeah, we get we get messages constantly as a show. I get messages privately of like, okay, this is where I'm at, and I have no frame of reference, no teachers, no partners, nobody to go on this journey with. And so everyone's always asking for resources, and I actually think that's something not to be ashamed of, to like search for wider teachers. Like that's an important part of the journey.
You said wider, not whiter, right?
Wider.
Yeah, I was like, what?
A wide breadth of teachers.
Maybe diverse.
Thank you. Yes.
I am, my teachers were, well, first of all, Bertram Johnson, who many of you have heard me talk a lot about. I call him my fairy godfather. He was the first gay Christian man I knew. And the first adult that I told that I was gay who believed me and who didn't try to fix me. And he was working for an organization called Multi-Faith AIDS Project in Seattle. And so my teachers came in the form of men dying of AIDS, who had lived a life of silence, who had lived through a pandemic. Spending hours and days with these men taught me a lot. And then there was, I had a professor named Jeff Mallinson who came my senior year of Bible school, who was teaching philosophical theology. And so philosophical theology was like my first bump, right? And then my new advisor, Stacy Kitahata, gave me Just a Sister Away by Renita Weems. And that was my introduction to liberation theology, and I never went back, ever, because it was like everything I needed. I came through philosophy and Black women and men dying of AIDS. So
it's interesting to think about some of my teachers who I wasn't ready for them yet. There's that saying that when the student's ready, the teacher shows up. But then after you've gone down the path a little ways and you look back and you're like, oh, yeah, if I had actually followed that thread of thought that person was offering to me at that moment, things might have ended up differently. I remember a teacher in the Adventist system who would whisper to me, that the story of Adam and Eve, that's just a myth, right? And I remember thinking, does she mean that it's not true? Does she mean, I just remember wondering about that and then just sort of stuffing it down and moving on. But books have always been my teachers, I think. Sue Monk Kidd, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, was a really formative book for me. And also Jim Marion, Death of the Mythic God and the Rise of Evolutionary Spirituality, hugely influential. Both of those books happened, they were just within my reach by happenstance. And I picked them up and it was pretty powerful.
To add just another book, there's a book called Our Religions, where there are 6 major religions and they're written from scholars from their own context. And it's a compilation. It's not super hard to read, and it is just brilliant. I think digging deep into that, and it's a pretty large book, just shaped me in an appreciation for my own tradition, my own place kind of in the world, brought me into the wider community. So I think teachers can be kind of anywhere.
And for something that was a helpful resource for me was 5 Stages of the Soul, which anyway, it's worth a read.
For any listeners looking for something a little lighter, Holy Envy by Barbara Brown Taylor just recently came out. Great book on encountering other religions and other traditions and other truths out there that you may not have, and appreciating them without co-opting them.
Or take a world religions class from your local community college.
Yeah.
Or anthropology.
Or go visit a community that's not yours.
Yeah.
That did it for me. Going to a Hindu mandir blew my mind. I just like sat there and I was like, oh my God, I have to rethink everything that I think about myself and my own religious practice, because there was something so familiar happening there that was powerful and something very different too. And it's that kind of experience is worth doing. So visit other places.
Well, you encountered Christ there too.
Right. And it was really
in Hindu form.
Really unsettling.
Mm-hmm. I remember sitting every morning when I was living in India, sitting on the terrace and smelling the incense from the temple and hearing the call from the masjid and being like, there's something so profound, like something bigger than I can ever understand. Put yourself in positions where you're forced to.
But I would say in that is be aware of where you're at. Like Bonnie, going back to what you were saying, where you weren't ready for certain messages or certain people. I took a class in my during my bachelor's degree. It was an apologetics class, and the reason I signed up for it because it was apologetics. I want to learn how to defend my faith, but it was not like any apologetics class I ever had. The whole point of this class was we are going to expose you to literature that is not your own, not as a way to defend your faith, but to have a broader understanding of your journey by listening to the journey of others. And there's a lot of great books in that class. Like one of the things we had to read was Malcolm X's biography. It was the first time I read Gutierrez, Liberation Theology, like all these books. But at the time, it didn't resonate. I didn't reread those books until almost a decade later, where I was like, oh, I see. For me, it had to start with Rob Bell, with N.T. Wright, with guys that look like me, unfortunately. But I don't know if I would have felt enough kinship to move forward if I felt that I was alone. But I saw people that you know, and I wouldn't have articulated this in the moment, but now that I'm looking back, I saw people that look like me, that were putting to words things that I was thinking and was too afraid to put words to because my job depended on it, because my reputation depended on it, or whatever. And I mean, those were important steps for me. So I think, you know, really paying attention to where we're at is important. And I don't think that, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it's easy for someone to be listening to this conversation and feel like we're talking about deconstruction, which I think when we talk about that word, I think what the narrative that's been created in this space is that deconstruction is you had this one moment of change and now you're a new person and that's your new normal. And I think that what we're all talking about is it's not about deconstruction or reconstruction. It's just about, I don't even know how to articulate that, but it's about something more than, you know, just jumping from island to island or truth to truth or house to house. It's something else.
Honesty, attention, evolving and changing, all wrapped up in. I created kind of this like 15 things that one of the questions that Bonnie was asking us earlier is like, what do you wish you knew then? Or like, what resources do you have that you wish you could share? I created like this morning when I was drinking coffee and thinking about this conversation come up. I won't share all of them. Maybe I'll write something and just reference this and put it on the blog. But I read these compassion cards in the morning by Pema Chodron that use Buddhist teaching in the Lojong tradition. And so it's called Lojong and it has these sayings and some explanation on the back. And they're really nice reminders and pretty powerful for kind of orienting the day. And I came up with a few for people in spiritual transitions. And is it okay if I share one or two of those in this space? Or should I just post them? Because this, you know, we can tend to be long-winded.
Share your favorite, Alan.
My favorite?
Give us
my
the highlights.
1 out of 15? I'll just share just a few. Try to embrace a sense of adventure in the midst of uncertainty. Be curious, not judgmental. Have compassion for yourself and for others on the journey. And what that kind of means is bow to as much as you can in your tradition, even when leaving it behind on the roadside. Acknowledge it. Some stuff you have to burn down, right? And you have to be angry about, but whatever you can bow to that you're leaving behind, do it and honor it and leave it to the side. Let go of shame around your earnestness and your ignorance. Get embodied. There's more to that. Decenter and contextualize your myths, stories, and identities. Get comfortable with cognitive dissonance. And what I mean by that is, like, don't just shove it down. When you see these two different things happening in you and these two different competing ideas, just pay attention to them. Like, take a step back and recognize them rather than trying to avoid them. There's a lot more, obviously, in here, but those are just some things I've been thinking through. And maybe I'll post all 15.
But, none of those are your own, Alan.
Of course not.
Those have been around for millennia. But, like Jeff was talking about with Rob Bell, what you're talking about with these beautiful bits and pieces, we sometimes down the road, we look back and we feel kind of a sense of like, well, yeah, mine was Rob Bell, who was actually, Love Wins was kind of an important book in my journey too. I'm like, okay, if I was swimming in a pool and some pimply-faced teenager saved my life, and he turned out to be a jerk later in life, he still holds a place of importance in my journey. So I think kind of what you were saying, Alan, when you look back, rather than having some shame or conflicted feelings over moments and things that helped move you along, hold them dear. Give them a place of reverence.
People used to set up like altars, right? Along the road.
Absolutely.
And they would mark it and recognize it.
Oh my God, we should put an altar for Bonnie. I'm going to make an altar for Bonnie in my house.
Don't.
Oh my God.
Oh my, Casey, that's just too much.
One other thing that I recently heard from, he was actually on the show. Joey. Joey was in how evangelical groups skew progressive in proximity to whiteness. So that's an episode that could be in the show notes. He was sharing about using your faith and your faith tradition like art. Think of it in terms of art, and you're a part of creating something beautiful.
But I think all artists know that it begins by encountering themselves. I really appreciated what Jeff said about his guides had to be guides that talk like him, look like him, moved in the world a little bit like him to begin with. Because until we do the work of encountering ourselves first, we can't really be in relationship with anybody. And I do think that it's really tempting to go from jumping from the one island, I think Jeff said that too, to the next island, like going to a Hindu temple and expecting to encounter Christ there. Well, I don't think Christ is everywhere. And I hope that doesn't make me, blasphemous, people in my church listening. Christ isn't everywhere.
Jesus isn't everywhere. I would say the Christ.
Yeah, we could disagree about that.
Plurality is in lots of places.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I think that's
another
okay.
Episode, and you're wrong, but that's okay.
That's okay. Because there's something else there that you get to encounter because you go in firmly understanding the encounter that you've had with oneself. So I think it's really tempting, especially when we believe in this monolithic God in this monotheistic way, to think that God really pervades all. And that's one thing that I wish that I had known.
Yeah. I think this is like the perfect way to kind of close out this 4-part conversation on truth, to really land at a place where it's like all this stuff that we put out before in the previous 3 episodes. Here's the life and the experience that came from. And I really, I'm gonna jump into the Alan seat real quick, and I'm just gonna say I love you guys. Like, appreciate having these conversations and hearing these experiences and being reminded that, where we may have came from a similar worldview, but we all had such profoundly different experiences within that worldview. and remembering as we go forward and express our truth and encounter other truths to recognize that there is no monolith. There is no two peoples whose experience and walk through this journey is the same. And if we can remain mindful of that as we walk through and encounter each other and encounter others, I think that maybe the world will be a little better place, or at least at least the podcast sphere will be as we move forward. So any other final thoughts before we kind of close this chapter on truth and find some other long-winded way to express something simple as you guys are awesome.
Call anyone a friend who tries to make life on this little rock a little bit more bearable.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for being part of this journey with me, because now it really does feel like, rather than having a guide that I'm trying to follow, I feel like I have all of you to walk with and to teach me along the way.
I call Samwise. That's what I want to be. Casey, come on.
He's the best character. He is my favorite character. I think just, wherever you are in your process, know that it's a forever process. Rejoice in every moment. You can find a reason to rejoice. Accept setbacks with sobriety, and be willing to give yourself a break, and connect with people who will help you keep going and not try to push you in a direction, but other than the direction you need to be going.
There's too much wisdom in this episode. My heart and mind are too full. Rajiv, hearing that, accept setbacks with sobriety, I'm like, oh my God, I have to think for another whole week about what that means and means for me. Oh, it feels so great.
I would just say that hold life lightly, just enjoy the journey, and know that if you don't get it right today, there's always tomorrow, and even tomorrow might suck, and that's okay. Just keep going.
And tune in every single month.
And let us know what you think. You can add your voice to this particular conversation and comment at the show notes at irenicast.com/168. Also in the show notes, you'll find relevant links and a complete list of other ways to follow, and contact the show. That's irenicast.com/168. And if you'd like to further continue this conversation, join us Monday on Facebook Live and YouTube Live as we kind of revisit this episode and take some of your questions. And if you can't be there live and in person, you can always email us your thoughts at podcast@irenicast.com. That's podcast@irenicast.com. We have been really enjoying that time together on Mondays. On the other side of the music, we will be playing a game familiar to those that have been listening to the show for a long time. It's called Famous Christians for 100. Stay tuned. We are on the other side of the music, and we are going to be playing a game that I think was in the first 5 episodes of Irenicast. When we first started back in the day, we had a few segments that we came up with, and this was one of them. It's Famous Christians for 100. It is a play on Jeopardy. I'm sure many of you, I don't know, do people still watch Jeopardy? I don't know how that works. I honestly never watched a full episode of Jeopardy, so I wouldn't know. I just know the cultural reference.
What?
Yeah, it's boring to me.
It's so fun.
It is fun.
Especially when you can feel superior to other people because you know something.
You know some stuff, yeah.
To each their own. To each their own. This is our version of Jeopardy. And basically what we've done is we've all created, or not curated or created, but we've found a quote from a famous Christian, dead or alive. And we put quotes around Christian. Like, we understand that Christian is a wide, so people that would culturally recognize someone as Christian. So there's some wiggle room in there in terms of who we might be quoting. And each of us have to guess who said the quote that the other host is going to present to us. I think that's straightforward. It makes sense. Alan, let's start with you. What is your quote?
I was going to try to do something from Frank Peretti in some novel somewhere, This Present Darkness, but I decided to go with something different. So here we go. And you, by the way, when you answer, you have to say who is, or it doesn't count. Okay, that's how it works, Jeff. That's
No,
how
you
Jeopardy
don't.
Works.
You can do whatever the heck you want.
There is a reason Christianity is violently opposed in our world, while other religion philosophies are tolerated. Biblical Christianity evokes violent responses from some people because only in Christianity is there an let me say this clearly. Because only in Christianity is there an absolute right and wrong. People hate the Bible and Christianity because of the law of God.
Allen's Journal circa 2005.
I was going to say 2016.
You'd have to go 2002, man. No, that's 2002 status for me.
John MacArthur.
Pat Roberts.
Franklin Graham Jr.
Nobody has said who is yet.
John Piper.
Who is John MacArthur?
That's a great question. Who is he really, though?
He doesn't even know, honey. He doesn't even know.
The quote comes from Carmen.
Oh. That's a good one.
Music. That's a
deep cut, Alan. I love it.
I think we all know Carmen.
You all have heard Carmen's Trump song, right?
Oh my god.
No.
Oh,
Goodness.
It's
My life's
awful.
about to get better.
But I'm gonna
Nope.
you go on YouTube and put Carmen and Trump, and it is whew.
Nope.
Yeah.
Just say no. Don't add your click to that nonsense.
That's right. Don't harbor terrorism.
I already did. I won't put it in the show notes, but if you are so inclined, you can look it up, and it is wow.
I will look that up, and I just want to say I appreciate Carmen speaking into our conversation about truth. Only in Christianity is there absolute right and wrong. That's why people hate us.
Where in history has Christian had violent reaction?
It's
like where?
No, it has. It absolutely has. There are people being persecuted right now for their Christian faith in different countries. It does happen.
Okay, but
and in Christian history began with that. But as far as
but then ended with us perpetuating it.
So yeah, that's been all throughout.
Clear.
Yeah, who's the violent one? But it just sounds to me like, you know how when Americans are like, they hate us because our freedom. They hate us because we're free. Like that whole thing. Not because we're exploiting and, putting our military around the world and dominating all the conversations internationally. But they hate us for our freedom. And they hate us for our truth, you guys. Carmen.
Oh,
not Alan O'Brien, circa whatever.
Carmen. Oh, man. All right, Rajiv, let's hear what you got.
Rajiv, okay.
All right. Okay, I got a great one. Be nice to whites. They need you to rediscover their humanity.
That's great. I like it.
Be nice.
They need you to rediscover their humanity.
I have no idea.
Was this a professor you had?
Somebody who I love dearly, though.
It makes sense.
It'll make sense when you hear who it is.
Right.
All right. I should probably just say who it is. It's Bishop
Wait. Oh,
Desmond Tutu.
I was gonna say like Miguel de la Torre or something.
Oh.
I don't know if he would say that.
But
maybe.
Yeah, he might not. But it makes so much sense, right? When you think
right,
Bishop Tutu.
All right,
Interesting.
Bonnie.
Okay, here we go. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell.
How many people have done this trope of lunatic or liar? Like, oh man,
I'm pretty sure I'm saying C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I'm gonna second Jeff's guess.
Third.
I don't know, Rick Warren.
C.S. Lewis is correct.
Rick Warren.
That's a mere Christianity, right?
popularized-
Mere Christianity. Is that where that quote comes
I
from?
think so.
I think so, yeah.
Yep.
I'm preaching on
I should have.
Jesus as lunatic.
You know what's
so.
the giveaway there is the poached egg thing.
Right.
I should have thrown back a little bit further.
Yeah.
All right, Casey, what you got?
Frankly, condoms are a very, very poor protection against sexually transmitted diseases.
Whoa. Mike Pence.
Who is Pope Francis?
Who is Mike Pence?
I think that sounds like Franklin Graham.
Yeah, because he said frankly like that. I almost said that too.
Can I give another guess?
Yeah, go for it.
Mother Teresa?
I mean, you're not wrong, but it was. Bonnie, do you have a guess before I tell everyone?
I have no idea.
It is the Christian supremacist himself, Mike Pence.
Oh,
I
You got
called
it
it.
right, yeah.
Yay. He really said that?
He sure did. He said it
Man.
in 2002 on CNN.
God.
Mike Pence circa 2002, you know.
But not change. I mean, 2002, 2020, same.
Dang. I was just thinking we were joking about Alan 2002, Mike Pence 2002. We might have been friends. Maybe.
probably.
Yeah, you know, maybe we should do an episode on sex in general. That would be interesting.
Yeah.
We've talked about that years ago, and I don't know if I was ready for it, to be enlightened, you know?
Or just generally talk about it.
I could talk about sex. It's just like poop jokes and stuff that I can't talk about, you know? That's the difference.
Well, for some people, that's one and the same, Alan.
I'm not here to shame anyone for what does it for them, okay?
All right, Jeff.
All
and
right.
now to you.
Okay, so my turn. Here's my quote. If we try to rescue God from his sovereignty over suffering, we sacrifice his sovereignty to turn all things for good.
Who is John Piper?
I don't
Okay.
know. Sovereignty is a big word if it's Franklin Graham Jr. He doesn't use big words very often. So
I'll give you each $5 if it's not John Piper. And whoever guesses it right, I'll give you 10.
look, I'm telling you right now, you better be ready to Venmo me if it's.
It
I'm
sounds
open to
like
that.
just about every
I know,
theologian that
it's
I've
like-
ever read.
Who is John Paul II?
Hate not Catholics over here, Reggie. What's going on, man?
Just throwing him in, bringing him into the Protestant conversation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Alan, you're too good at this game. It is John Piper.
Can I tell you why I knew that? Well, first of all, I read a bunch of his books way back when. His whole perspective, Casey, don't take a deep breath and look away. Look straight into my eyes when I talk about this, okay? How dare you? John Piper's idea is that everything is for God's glory. Everything that's ever happened or ever will be is 100% only and primarily made for God's glory. So he talked about being a Christian hedonist, enjoy life because it's for God's glory, embrace suffering because it's for
He and
God's
God get to
glory.
be narcissists together.
Right. So
Right.
God micromanages the world to extract, to suck out of it the most glory that God could. It's unfortunate.
I just think it to me this quote embodies this scene from The Office where Michael Scott is hiding behind a door
Yes.
with Andy peeking around the corner, and he turns to the camera and says, "How can one person be so self-unaware?" And to me, like, if God has sovereignty, how is it under threat all the time? Like, it just the whole like quote of that. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. It's just it's the embodiment of how can someone be so self-unaware. It just makes me giggle because it has to. Otherwise, it'll make me cry. All right. Well, that will do it for us this week. This was a wonderful journey through truth that we had. I enjoyed every moment of it. So that'll do it for us this week. If you enjoy Irenicast and you would like to join the work that we are doing, please consider donating to our PayPal link at irenicast.com/PayPal. And we want to thank in particular David Shepard for his donation on PayPal. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. We're committed to keeping the show for free for listeners, but there are costs involved and your financial support helps. It's irenicast.com/PayPal. Irenicast is also a nonprofit organization, so your donations are tax deductible. For more information on other ways you can partner with the show, please go to irenicast.com/support. You can also support the show by simply just making sure you're subscribed to the show and never miss on an episode on whatever listening platform you're on. And if you can, leave a rating and or review. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
It's Casey.
Peace, love, and hugs. This is Rajiv.
Thanks for joining the conversation.